and welcome to this review of my Acer Series 6310 keyboards. This is a remake of my 6312TW keyboard review, which came out over 2 years ago and was well in need of an update since I found a lot more about these keyboards and also obtained many more of them. The 6312 was the keyboard that catapulted me into the mech keyboard hobby. After my trusty old Sony Rubber Dome died, I figured I wanted an even older keyboard to replace it, and I found several of these in the to dispose of bin in the bowels of the chemistry building at my previous uni, which I was allowed to take home with me. Even if you don't know anything about mechanical keyboards, the 6312 is different enough that you can instantly tell that there's a difference if you try it out. The keyboard in my original review is no longer in my possession. I gave it away to a friend who still uses it to this day. I can hear him clicking along on it when we play games online. I've since found a lot of these though. They were a common find at the recycling centre and I bought them at 50p a piece. I took maybe a dozen of them apart for spares and kept the ones in best condition and the models I didn't have duplicates of, but they were mostly the TW version. TW refers to case style T with Windows keys, presumably. These things came with tons of different cases, which, to complicate matters, were identical to the cases shared by both earlier models and later models. So while it's easy to identify something as an Acer, you'll often need a picture of the label to be sure what switches are inside it. The oldest case model appears to be the G or possibly K case, which is a dipped back design and the same case as the one on the KB101A, which came with blue Alps. The K case is this one, in my opinion the best looking one, which is introduced in the 6010 series, which replaced the KB101A. The 6010 usually came with white Alps switches. The T-case model is the one I found most commonly and appears to have been introduced in the 6310 series, as were another few case designs which were carried along to the later 6510 series, which were rubber dome keyboards. Almost all the previous case designs were carried over to this series as well, so looking purely at the cases you could end up with anything from blue Alps to rubber domes. The T-case, as I mentioned, appears to be by far and away the most common case style for this series, at least the ones I found, and most of them were OEM'd by Acer for Vigeland, now a subsidiary of Amstrad. It's also the ugliest case in my opinion, with this weird wave shape, and it's the smallest and least substantial looking, although some people will be grateful for the lack of large bezels. It's not that badly built as it's got a metal back panel and 2-part flip-out feet so you can adjust the height, which I always think is a nice feature. But especially compared to the K case, which I really like, and the G case of the KB101A, which many people also tend to like, it doesn't look quite that great. None of the other case designs had a metal back panel though, they tended to have a metal back plate instead, and some versions of these came with a separate metal plate as well, presumably to keep everything flat, but most of them don't have this plate. Some models came with 4 indicator lights and some came with 3, even within the same case option, and the indicator lights are all of quite different styling. I like the K ones best myself. They use these horizontal light pipes instead of the more conventional sticker option, such as on the T and G model. Especially in the dark, they look like little shining emeralds, look at that. It comes with a PS2 plug, which is pretty easy to use on modern computers, and a short cable which is coiled. As for the switches, all models in the 6310 series have Acer switches, which are basically what Alps switches would be like if you put them under the cheapification ray. They only come in clicky versions, and they're basically a mechanical hammer system over a sensing membrane, which leads some people to call these semi-mechanical, but that's basically exactly how the IBM Model M works as well, and very few people would call that semi-mechanical. Moreover, I think the distinction isn't just arbitrary, but also irrelevant, because if a design works, who cares what it's made of? They kind of resemble Alps switches, and the caps are Alps mount, but they're branded Acer on the top, and the shape is a bit different. Acer switches could come in black or sometimes white versions, but they appear to be pretty much identical. The way they work is much like Alps switches too. There's a forward leaf spring inside there, which is pulled forward by the slider and then released to generate tactility and a clicky noise. But instead of pressing against the switch plate, there is a spring-loaded hammer underneath which presses against a set of membranes. These in turn register a key press. To prevent the click leaf from falling out of the switch, the slider has a lug on it which keeps it in place. The key feels not as smooth as proper Alps switches, and they don't feel as refined, but they're very tactile indeed, much more so than Alps. They're so tactile it's hard to be anywhere but all the way up or all the way down, so they have a very digital feel. Also, they have a fairly nice clicky sound because of the metal leaf spring that generates it. Because the chassis is plastic in all models, this results in a very distinctive sound that's easily recognizable. Here, I'll give you a quick demo. Acer switches like Black Alps tend to get mixed reviews, with some people really not liking them, but I've always thought they were nice switches. Every time I go back to using one of these, I like them. They're not top tier switches or anything, don't get me wrong, but I think they're pretty decent. And also like Black Alps, these are good beginner switches. They feel a bit lighter than Alps, and because they're more tactile, it's easy to draw comparisons to Matthias. Now, Matthias switches have a comparable feel, but they're a bit smoother and more refined in my opinion, although they're also much more expensive typically. However, one charming trait I've always liked about these switches is that they're by far the most serviceable switches I've ever seen in my life. In most switches, like Cherry MX and countless others, if something goes wrong inside some of the switches, you need to take apart the case, desolder the switches, take them out of the board, take the shells apart, fix whatever is wrong, usually some dust or something, just blow it out with some compressed air, put the switches back together again, put them back in the board, resolder them back and reassemble the case. These Acer switches, however, are absolutely beautiful in their handling characteristics. What you do is just unscrew the back panel and take it off, and then move the membrane out of the way. Be careful, in some cases it's glued to the controller, and all the insides of the switches are instantly exposed and all the parts are secured to something. Just hoover the fuck out of it or blow it out with some compressed air and bam, clean keyboard. Fucking brilliant. Over time, the membranes might get slightly oxidized. Remember, it's a membrane board after all, in which case you can just use a rubber and gently rub off the black oxidation bits and it'll be as good as new. These do tend to need maintenance a bit more frequently than fully mechanical keyboards do, but because it's so piss easy, I'd say it actually takes less time overall. I'm always a big fan of user serviceability, and these switches absolutely excel at it. If you accidentally ruin a switch, you can even just clip it out of the frame, which is the same as the top case, and clip a new one in, and it's ready to go again, no fuss at all. At some point I discovered this one, which is a bit older than the rest, namely from 1995. It uses the same keycap set as the old KB101A2 compared to the later font, and it doesn't have Windows keys. Some of the older keyboards like this one use switches which look identical at first sight, but which upon closer inspection are found to have lubricant applied to the slider, just like the old variations of Alps switches. This appears to be uncommon, as I don't think anyone has documented this yet, but like with Alps, it makes a noticeable difference in key feel. These feel better than the standard switches. Smoother and crisper. Nice. Here you can see one of the older lubricated sliders. I deliberately wiped the lubricant off of the top of the slider, but it's still present on the rest of it, as you can see. Interestingly, just like with Alps, there are also versions with and without slits, although the difference isn't as big as it is with Alps switches. The keycaps are thin ABS with very mysterious printing. I've done a bit of research with these, including cutting them open and looking at them under an electron microscope, and I found that it has elements of pad printing, lasering and dye sublimation, but it doesn't appear to be any of them. What it is exactly, I'm really not sure. I suspect it might be UV printing, but for the while I've been referring to it as Acer printing. It looks pretty sharp though. Some other keyboards, like certain very specific models of Dell 8101, also use this printing, but it's by far the most common on Acer boards, hence the nickname. It's honestly not bad lettering, but the keycaps, because they're ABS, tend to go quite yellow over time. So if that happens, you might want to retrobrite them or get a different set of Alps mount keycaps for them. Note that they use irregular stabilizers and a rather short spacebar, so some keys are fairly specific to this model. Overall, these are really not bad keyboards in my opinion. I don't really understand why they get a relatively high amount of stick. The switches are a bit in your face, both with the strong tactile feel and the rather loud clicky sound, but they feel pretty decent in my opinion. The boards have average to above average build quality and are super easy to clean and fix, not to mention easy to adapt to modern computers, and they come with modern 104 and 105 key layouts. Of course, being a membrane board, it has just 2 key rollover, but apart from that, it's very usable, and usually cheap because they're common and demand isn't high. By the way guys, I plan to do a remake video like this once every 3 weeks from now on, and although I try to redo the oldest ones first, and hope to do them all eventually, I'm open to suggestions on which ones to do first, so let me know if you want one remade in particular. That's it for this review, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on the Keycaps version of this keyboard.